David Harrington, heir to the Harrington fortune, had everything one could desire. He was the epitome of success, handsome, wealthy, and intelligent. Yet, behind the facade of privilege, David was empty. His family had spent years pushing him into relationships with women who were perfect on paper but lacked the spark he craved. His mother, in particular, constantly introduced him to socialites, desperate for him to settle down with someone from an equally prestigious family. But David wasn't interested in superficial connections. He had always felt misunderstood in the world of high society, surrounded by fake smiles and empty pleasantries. He was more than just a trophy to be married off. What he longed for was authenticity, a connection based on mutual respect and shared understanding, not wealth and status. One rainy afternoon, as David was walking down a crowded city street, lost in thought, he spotted a young woman sitting alone on a park bench. Her coat was frayed, her hair unkempt, and she seemed out of place in the bustling world around her. Despite the grim circumstances, there was something captivating about her. Her eyes held a quiet strength, a resilience that intrigued him. Her name was Emerald, and little did David know, she was about to change his life forever. Emerald had once lived a comfortable life as an artist in a small studio apartment. She had big dreams of making it as a painter, but life had taken a harsh turn when she lost her job and had to sell her possessions. Soon, she was living on the streets, struggling to make ends meet. Despite everything, she never let go of her dignity. She avoided begging and worked odd jobs whenever she could, but her situation seemed hopeless. The woman sitting on the park bench was a far cry from the confident artist she had once been. David, intrigued by her presence and struck by her beauty, approached her with a simple offer. He asked if she was all right, offering to buy her a warm meal or a drink. Emerald, not accustomed to such gestures, politely declined, but her voice was soft and her gratitude was evident. They spoke for a few minutes, and David quickly realized that she was no ordinary woman. There was a certain charm about her, something real and raw that he couldn't ignore. Before leaving, David made an offer she couldn't refuse. He had a problem that needed solving. His mother had been relentlessly pressuring him to find a suitable wife, someone from an elite background, someone who could enhance his social standing. In exchange for a temporary arrangement, David offered Emerald a hefty sum of money to pretend to be his girlfriend for a few public events, including a high-profile charity gala his family was hosting in a few weeks. Emerald was taken aback by the offer. At first, she thought it was a joke, but as David explained his situation, she began to consider it seriously. She was desperate for work and had nothing to lose. It was an offer that seemed too good to pass up, and so, reluctantly, she agreed. David's penthouse was a stark contrast to the life Emerald had grown accustomed to. Once a proud artist, now a homeless woman, she was unprepared for the lavishness of David's world. Everything about it screamed excess, from the marble floors to the glittering chandeliers and the plush furniture. But David, as handsome as he was, had an air of gentleness about him that made her feel less like an outsider and more like someone who belonged. As part of the arrangement, David introduced Emerald to a team of stylists and personal assistants. For the first time in months, Emerald found herself receiving the kind of care she had long forgotten. Her hair was done, her skin pampered, and she was dressed in beautiful clothes that accentuated her natural beauty. Although she felt like a fish out of water, there was a small part of her that enjoyed the transformation. Emerald, now looking every bit the part of an elegant woman, prepared herself for the upcoming charity gala. The event was set to be a grand affair, filled with David's wealthiest family members and prestigious business associates. His mother, Eleanor Harrington, had already been asking questions about his mysterious girlfriend, and David knew he needed to introduce her in a way that would quell any suspicions. His mother's approval meant everything to him, even though he found her controlling and overbearing. Emerald felt conflicted. On the one hand, the money she was receiving was more than she could have ever imagined. But on the other hand, she couldn't ignore the fact that she was living a lie, pretending to be someone she wasn't. She had spent so much time trying to be true to herself, and now she was playing a part in someone else's drama. Still, she swallowed her discomfort. This was a temporary solution, she told herself. She just needed to get back on her feet. The night of the gala arrived, and Emerald, now stunning in an elegant dress, stepped into the ballroom on David's arm. The once homeless woman was now a vision of sophistication, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. As they entered the venue, the guests immediately turned their attention toward them. David had always been a focal point at these events, but tonight, it was the woman beside him who was stealing the spotlight. David's family, particularly his mother, was immediately suspicious of Emerald's sudden appearance in their world. Eleanor, ever the perfectionist, approached them with a cold smile. She scrutinized Emerald with a critical eye, subtly testing her to see if she was the kind of woman David should marry. But Emerald, though nervous, stood her ground. She answered questions with confidence and grace, impressing even the most cynical of guests. Throughout the night, David couldn't help but admire how easily Emerald navigated the event. She was poised, intelligent, and handled herself with a quiet elegance. For a woman who had been through so much, she seemed unshaken. As he watched her engage with his family and friends, he began to see her in a new light, not just as a means to an end, but as someone special. As the evening wore on, David realized something. This arrangement, which had started as a simple business deal, was beginning to feel like something more. He found himself drawn to Emerald in ways he hadn't anticipated. She was unlike any woman he had ever met. Her authenticity, her warmth, and her quiet strength were qualities he had been searching for all along, though he hadn't known it until now. Meanwhile, Emerald was trying to keep her emotions in check. She was aware of the growing attraction between them, but she didn't want to admit it. After all, their relationship was based on a temporary arrangement, and she couldn't afford to get emotionally involved. As the night came to an end, they shared a brief moment on the balcony. The cool night air seemed to calm them both, and as they spoke, the tension between them began to dissipate. Emerald was surprised by how easy it was to talk to David. She had expected him to be aloof and detached, but instead, he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and feelings. The night ended with a shared glance, a subtle spark of something unspoken between them. But neither of them was willing to admit it, at least, not yet. In the weeks that followed the charity gala, David and Emerald continued their temporary arrangement. The nights they spent together at high-profile events were becoming more frequent, and with each passing day, their connection deepened. David was surprised to find how much he enjoyed spending time with Emerald. She had an innate charm, her wit sharp and her perspective on life refreshingly different from the other women in his social circle. Emerald, on the other hand, was beginning to feel a strange sense of comfort with David. She had always been cautious around people with wealth and power, knowing that their world was far removed from hers. But David was different. He never looked down on her, never made her feel inferior. He treated her with kindness and respect, and that made her heart soften. The more she got to know him, the more she realized that the layers of wealth and privilege couldn't mask the loneliness that haunted him. As time passed, Emerald found herself becoming more comfortable in her role. She had initially hesitated to play the part of David's perfect girlfriend, but now it felt almost natural. They would share quiet dinners, laughing over stories about their childhoods, and David would tell her about the challenges he faced in his business world. Emerald, in return, shared stories of her struggle to survive on the streets and the dreams she still held onto, even when life seemed cruel. But there were moments when Emerald's conscience weighed heavily on her. She knew she was pretending to be someone she wasn't, and it wasn't just about the role she was playing in front of David's family and friends. It was the way she had started to care about him, really care. She had told herself she was doing this for the money, to get back on her feet. But the truth was, she was beginning to fall for him, and that scared her. David, too, was starting to see things differently. He had begun to wonder if this arrangement, which had started as a simple business deal, was becoming something more for both of them. There were moments when he would catch her glancing at him with warmth in her eyes, and it made him realize how much he was beginning to enjoy her company. What had begun as a carefully planned arrangement was slowly turning into a real relationship, one that neither of them had expected. Despite this growing attraction, neither David nor Emerald was willing to address it directly. They both understood that the relationship was supposed to be temporary. Once his family was satisfied, they would go their separate ways, and Emerald would return to her life and David to his. But as the days wore on, both began to wonder how easy or difficult it would be to let go. One evening, David invited Emerald to attend an important dinner with some influential clients. As always, she dressed up and accompanied him to the event. The atmosphere was elegant, filled with rich, high-profile individuals who were all vying for David's attention. As usual, he introduced Emerald as his girlfriend, and she graciously smiled and interacted with the guests. Everything seemed to be going as planned. However, during the dinner, something unexpected happened. A woman named Giselle, who was a former acquaintance of David's, approached the table. She was everything that David's family would consider perfect, elegant, well-spoken, and highly educated. But as soon as she laid eyes on Emerald, a subtle sneer crossed her face. "I didn't expect to see you here," Giselle said, her tone dripping with condescension as she directed her gaze toward Emerald. David noticed the slight, his jaw tightening, but he didn't respond immediately. Emerald, who had been silently observing the interaction, was taken aback by Giselle's attitude. She could feel the judgment in the air, and it made her uncomfortable. "You know," Giselle continued, "it's not every day that David brings someone like you to one of these events. I'm sure he's just trying to be nice." Emerald's face flushed with embarrassment, but she kept her composure. She didn't want to let this woman's words get to her. Before she could respond, David finally spoke, his voice firm. "Giselle," David said coolly, "I'm not interested in your opinions. Emerald is here with me as my guest, and that's all that matters." David's words were simple, but they were clear. He had no tolerance for Giselle's attempts to belittle Emerald. For a moment, the room fell silent, and Giselle, sensing the change in atmosphere, quickly excused herself, her face red with humiliation. After the incident, David took Emerald aside, apologizing for what had happened. "I didn't expect her to be so rude," he said, his expression guilty. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Emerald smiled, though there was a faint sadness in her eyes. "It's all right. I'm used to people like her." David looked at her, his heart aching for the pain she had endured in silence. He wanted to say more, to express just how much he valued her, but he held back. He didn't know if it was the right time. As the evening came to a close, David walked Emerald back to the car, and for the first time in a while, he found himself lost in thought. The evening had been uncomfortable, but it had also shown him something important. He was willing to stand up for Emerald. He wanted to protect her, not just because she was playing a role, but because she was someone who deserved respect and love. The weeks following the dinner were marked by a subtle shift in their relationship. Though their agreement had been for Emerald to pretend to be David's girlfriend, there was a growing undercurrent of affection between them that neither could ignore. It was in the small gestures, David holding the door for her, his hand brushing against hers in passing, the quiet moments of shared laughter when no one else was around. Emerald, who had always kept people at arm's length, found herself opening up to David in ways she never expected. She shared more about her past, the struggles she faced growing up, and her dreams of being a successful artist. David listened attentively, his interest genuine. He had spent most of his life surrounded by people who were only interested in what he could offer them, but Emerald's sincerity was a breath of fresh air. David, in turn, began to open up to her about his own vulnerabilities. He talked about the pressure he felt to live up to his family's expectations, about the loneliness that came with being the heir to a vast fortune. In Emerald, he found someone who didn't judge him or treat him as just a means to an end. She saw him for who he truly was, a man searching for connection in a world that demanded perfection. One evening, while they were having dinner at his penthouse, David reached across the table and took Emerald's hand in his. His touch was gentle, but there was an undeniable warmth in it. "Emerald," David began, his voice softer than usual, "I need to tell you something. I've never been this comfortable with anyone before. You've made me feel things I never thought I would again. You're not just playing a role anymore. You've become someone important to me." Emerald's heart skipped a beat. and she found herself speechless. She had been trying so hard to maintain emotional distance, but hearing David's words stirred something deep within her. It was clear now. They were both falling for each other, and neither could ignore it any longer. But even with these feelings growing between them, Emerald couldn't help but remind herself that their time together was limited. This was still an arrangement, and once it was over, they would have to part ways. Yet, as David's fingers intertwined with hers, she couldn't deny the pull between them. David and Emerald's relationship had grown beyond the confines of their original arrangement. What started as a business transaction, her pretending to be his girlfriend for the sake of his family's approval, was now evolving into something much deeper. Yet, neither David nor Emerald was willing to fully admit the feelings that were blooming between them. As days passed, their interactions became more intimate, but still, they maintained a certain distance, aware of the temporary nature of their arrangement. They both knew that when the deal was over, their lives would return to what they once were. But deep down, there was a nagging sense of unease, an unspoken tension that neither could ignore. David had taken Emerald on countless dates, to extravagant restaurants and charity events, but in the quiet moments alone, he found himself longing for more. He could no longer see her simply as his pretend girlfriend. She had become an integral part of his life. His family and friends had begun to warm up to her, and she had fit in effortlessly into his world, dazzling everyone with her natural beauty and charm. Yet it was her kindness, her genuine warmth, that had captivated him the most. Emerald, on the other hand, was struggling with a whirlwind of emotions. Despite her growing attraction to David, she reminded herself constantly that this was all a facade, a role she was playing for money and security. She had lived most of her life in survival mode, never allowing herself to get close to anyone, afraid of being hurt. But David was different. Every moment they spent together made her question the walls she had built around her heart. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of David's penthouse, watching the city lights twinkle below, Emerald felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She rested her head against his shoulder, and for a fleeting moment, the weight of her past seemed to disappear. David turned to her, his voice low and sincere. "Emerald," he began, his tone hesitant, "I've been thinking a lot lately. I don't know what this is between us, whether it's just the arrangement or something more, but I do know one thing. You mean more to me than I ever expected." Emerald's heart raced at his words. She wanted to respond, to tell him how much he had come to mean to her too, but she couldn't bring herself to say it. The truth was too complicated, too fragile. She pulled away slightly, trying to mask the vulnerability that had crept into her heart. I think we're both just getting too comfortable with this," she said softly, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "We're supposed to keep our distance, remember? It's just an arrangement." David's heart sank, but he knew she was right. They had made a deal, one that had a time limit. Still, he couldn't help but feel that their connection was real. But he respected her too much to push her, so he nodded, swallowing the emotions rising in his chest. "I understand," he said, though his voice was strained with a hint of sadness. "But just know, Emerald, that no matter what happens after this, you've already changed my life in ways I never expected." Days turned into weeks, and the tension between David and Emerald only intensified. They continued to attend events together, playing their parts flawlessly. Yet, every moment outside of their performances became more and more difficult to navigate. It was as if the walls they had both carefully built around their hearts were slowly crumbling, piece by piece. One evening, David took Emerald to a secluded beach house for a weekend getaway. It was meant to be a quiet retreat, a time for them to escape the prying eyes of the public and the pressures of their arrangement. But from the moment they arrived, the weight of their unspoken feelings hung heavily in the air. As they walked along the beach, the sound of the crashing waves providing a soothing backdrop, David stole a glance at Emerald. She looked breathtaking under the moonlight, her hair tousled by the breeze, her eyes lost in thought. For the first time in a while, he didn't want to be the man who had everything. He wanted to be the man who could give her something real. "You don't have to pretend anymore," David said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet night. Emerald looked at him, confused. What do you mean? I mean, I know what this arrangement was supposed to be, he said, his voice low but steady. But I can't keep pretending either. I don't want to pretend anymore. Emerald's heart raced, but she quickly shook her head. David, this isn't real. We agreed. This is all just temporary. Once your family's convinced, we'll go our separate ways and I'll... David stepped closer, gently taking her hand in his. I don't care about the agreement anymore, Emerald. I care about you. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. The words she had been holding back, words she never thought she would say, were on the tip of her tongue, but she was afraid. Afraid of what it meant, of what would happen if she allowed herself to feel this way. David seemed to sense her hesitation, his expression softening. Emerald, I've spent my life surrounded by people who only want something from me. But with you, I feel like I can finally be myself. You're the one thing in my life that feels real, and I don't want to lose that. Emerald's heart ached, torn between the fear of getting hurt and the undeniable pull she felt toward him. She had never imagined that this arrangement, this fake relationship, would lead to something so real. But here they were, standing on the edge of something neither of them was ready to confront. I'm scared too, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. But what if this doesn't last? David smiled, the warmth in his eyes making her chest tighten. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But for now, let's stop pretending, Emerald. You and me, this, right here, is real. The air between them shifted, charged with a new energy, and as the moonlight bathed them in its silver glow, Emerald finally allowed herself to let go of her doubts, just for a moment. She stepped into his arms, and for the first time since their journey began, they both knew that this was no longer just an arrangement. It was a beginning. The aftermath of their emotional night on the beach left Emerald and David grappling with new realities. Their unspoken connection had been brought into the open, yet uncertainty loomed over what this change truly meant. Back in the city, life resumed, but neither could shake the memory of that moment, the vulnerability, the promises whispered in the moonlight. David found himself distracted during meetings, his thoughts often wandering back to Emerald. The once clear lines between business and emotion had blurred entirely, leaving him unsure of how to proceed. For Emerald, every interaction with David carried a newfound weight. Her heart betrayed her with every stolen glance, every accidental touch, and she could no longer deny that her feelings for him were growing deeper by the day. Their dynamic began to shift subtly. David was no longer just the billionaire who hired her for a temporary arrangement. He was a man who cared for her, who listened intently when she spoke, who made her feel seen in ways no one ever had. Emerald, in turn, became a source of light in David's life, a grounding presence amid the chaos of his world. But Emerald's insecurities still lingered like shadows. She had spent years surviving on her own, and the idea of someone like David truly wanting her felt too good to be true. Was she simply a novelty to him? A fleeting distraction from his gilded life? One evening, as they prepared for another high-profile event, David noticed the hesitation in Emerald's eyes as she adjusted the shimmering gown he had gifted her. "What's wrong?" he asked softly, stepping closer. Emerald hesitated, avoiding his gaze. I don't know if I belong in your world, David. These people, these events, it all feels so far from who I am." David gently turned her to face him, his eyes earnest. "Emerald, you belong anywhere you choose to be. And for what it's worth, you belong with me." His words struck a chord deep within her, but the doubts refused to fade completely. She forced a smile and nodded, letting him take her hand as they left for the event. The gala was grand, even by David's standards. Lavish chandeliers bathed the room in golden light, and the air buzzed with the chatter of high society. Emerald played her role flawlessly, her charm and poise drawing admiration from every corner. But as the night wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She caught sight of a woman standing near the bar, her sharp gaze fixed on Emerald, dressed impeccably in designer attire. The woman exuded an air of authority and disdain. Emerald felt a chill as she recognized her, Margaret, David's ex-fiancée. Margaret approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So, you're the new flavor of the month," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Emerald stiffened, unsure how to respond. Margaret's presence was intimidating, a stark reminder of the world Emerald had stepped into. David appeared by her side, his expression darkening as he noticed Margaret. "Margaret," he said curtly, his voice laced with annoyance. "What are you doing here?" "I'm simply observing," Margaret replied smoothly, her eyes flicking between David and Emerald. "It's fascinating how quickly you've moved on." "This isn't the time or place," David said firmly, steering Emerald away. But Margaret's parting words lingered in the air. "Be careful, darling. Not everything is as it seems." Emerald's unease grew as the night progressed. She couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that Margaret's words carried a deeper meaning. Did Margaret know something Emerald didn't? Was there a part of David's life he hadn't shared with her? Later that evening, back at the penthouse, Emerald voiced her concerns. "David," she began hesitantly, "is there something you're not telling me?" David looked at her, his expression softening. "What do you mean?" Margaret's words, "She made it seem like there's more to all of this than I know. I need to know if there's anything I should be worried about." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Margaret is bitter, Emerald. She lost control when we ended things, and now she's trying to stir up trouble. Don't let her get into your head." Emerald nodded, but the doubt lingered. Trusting someone like David, someone whose life was worlds apart from her own, was a leap of faith she wasn't sure she was ready to take. As David watched her retreat to her room, he felt a pang of regret. There were parts of his life he hadn't yet shared with Emerald, secrets he had kept buried for years. And while he wanted nothing more than to protect her from the complexities of his world, he knew that the truth would have to come out eventually. In the quiet of the night, both David and Emerald were left to confront the uncertainties that threatened to unravel the fragile bond they were building. But one thing was clear: their journey was far from over. The tension between Emerald and David simmered beneath the surface in the days that followed. While they carried on with their arrangement, Emerald couldn't shake her lingering doubts. Margaret's presence at the gala had planted a seed of insecurity, and David's evasive responses only deepened her unease. Meanwhile, David grappled with his own inner conflict. He knew he was falling for Emerald, but his past weighed heavily on him. Margaret had once been a significant part of his life, but their relationship was built on appearances and ambition, not love. Now, with Emerald, everything felt different, real and unfiltered. Yet he feared his past could jeopardize what they were building together. One evening, Emerald decided she could no longer let her doubts fester. She approached David in his study, where he was reviewing business documents. "David," she began, her voice steady but laced with vulnerability, "I need to know the truth. About Margaret, about your past, everything." David set down his papers and met her gaze. There was a long pause before he spoke. "You're right. You deserve to know." He motioned for her to sit, and as she did, he began to recount his past. "Margaret and I were engaged because it made sense on paper. Her family and mine had business ties, and our union was more of a merger than a relationship. I thought it was what I wanted at the time. Success, power, influence, but I quickly realized how hollow it all felt. Margaret and I weren't in love, and we both knew it. She loved the image of us more than she ever loved me." Emerald listened intently, her heart softening as she saw the vulnerability in his eyes. "I ended things when I couldn't keep pretending. Margaret didn't take it well. She tried to use our past to tarnish my reputation, but in the end, it didn't matter. I've kept my distance ever since, but clearly, she hasn't let go." Emerald nodded, her fears easing slightly. "Thank you for telling me. I don't want to feel like I'm stepping into something I don't understand." David reached for her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. "You're not. Emerald, You've brought something into my life that I never thought I'd find, genuine connection. I won't let anything or anyone ruin that." For the first time in days, Emerald felt a sense of clarity. While their journey was far from simple, she realized that David's feelings for her were sincere. The following week brought a shift in their relationship. David made a conscious effort to open up more, sharing stories of his childhood and dreams he had long buried under the weight of responsibility. Emerald, in turn, began to let her guard down, revealing snippets of her own past, the hardships, the heartbreaks, and the resilience that had shaped her. Their bond deepened as they navigated these uncharted waters together. However, the world outside their bubble remained as relentless as ever. Margaret wasn't the only obstacle lurking in the shadows. At a charity auction David hosted, Emerald noticed a man lingering near the bar, his sharp gaze fixed on her. He was well-dressed but carried an air of menace that set her on edge. She tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the man's persistence was unsettling. Later that evening, as the event wound down, the man approached her. "You must be Emerald," he said, his tone dripping with false charm. "I've heard so much about you." "Who are you?" she asked cautiously, taking a step back. "Let's just say I'm someone who's very interested in David's affairs, and yours, by extension," the man replied, his smile cold. Before Emerald could respond, David appeared, his expression dark with fury. "Vincent," he said through gritted teeth, "what are you doing here?" Vincent smirked. "Just saying hello. You know me, David, always curious about your investments." David's hand tightened around Emerald's arm protectively. "Stay away from her," he warned. Vincent chuckled and raised his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, old friend. I'm just here to observe. For now." As Vincent walked away, Emerald turned to David, her anxiety mounting. "Who was that?" "An old rival," David replied, his jaw clenched. "He's dangerous, Emerald. Stay away from him." The encounter left Emerald shaken, but it also solidified her trust in David. Despite the challenges they faced, she realized they were stronger together. As the night drew to a close, David made a silent vow to protect Emerald at all costs. She wasn't just a part of his life anymore. She was his life, and he wouldn't let anyone take that away from him. The days following Vincent's ominous appearance were tense. David assigned his most trusted security personnel to discreetly shadow Emerald, though he didn't share all the details with her. He couldn't bear the thought of her worrying more than she already was. Emerald, however, wasn't oblivious. She noticed the increased presence of security and David's growing preoccupation. While she appreciated his efforts, she longed for transparency. One evening, as they sat in the library, Emerald broke the silence. "David, you're keeping something from me." David looked up from his laptop, the weight of his responsibilities evident in his eyes. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what? Or who?" Emerald pressed, her voice steady but filled with concern. David hesitated before responding. "Vincent is more than an old rival. He's dangerous. He's made it his mission to dismantle everything I've built, and now that includes you." Emerald's heart raced at his words. "Why? What does he want?" "Power," David said bitterly. "He thrives on control and chaos. When I took over one of my family's key businesses, I unknowingly stepped on his toes. He's been waiting for an opportunity to strike back, and now he sees you as a weak spot." Emerald's resolve hardened. "I'm not a weak spot, David. If we're going to face this, we do it together." David's admiration for her grew in that moment. He nodded, his grip on her hand tightening. Together. To counter Vincent's schemes, David decided to host an exclusive business gala, inviting key allies and stakeholders. The event was as much about fortifying relationships as it was about projecting strength. Emerald, though hesitant at first, agreed to attend. By David's side, she knew her presence would send a powerful message. The night of the gala, Emerald dazzled in a sleek emerald green gown that complemented her namesake. David couldn't take his eyes off her as they entered the grand ballroom. Whispers of admiration rippled through the crowd, and Emerald felt a surge of confidence. As they mingled with guests, Vincent appeared once again, his smirk as infuriating as ever. He sauntered up to them, a glass of champagne in hand. "David, you certainly know how to put on a show," Vincent drawled, his gaze lingering on Emerald. "And Miss Emerald, you look stunning as always." David stepped protectively closer to Emerald. "What do you want, Vincent?" "Oh, just observing," Vincent replied casually. "It's fascinating to see how far you'll go to protect your investment." Emerald refused to let Vincent intimidate her. She met his gaze with unwavering determination. "I'm not an investment, Vincent. I'm someone who believes in what David stands for, something you clearly can't comprehend." For the first time, Vincent's smirk faltered. He raised his glass mockingly. "We'll see how long that belief lasts." As Vincent walked away, David turned to Emerald, his expression filled with both worry and pride. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Emerald said firmly. "He needs to know I'm not afraid of him." The confrontation with Vincent only escalated his attempts to undermine David. Leaked documents, fabricated scandals, and sudden business setbacks kept David and his team on edge. But amidst the chaos, an unlikely ally emerged. Margaret, David's former fiancée, reached out with crucial information about Vincent's underhanded dealings. "I know you don't trust me," Margaret admitted when she met David and Emerald in a discreet cafe. "But Vincent is a snake, and he's going after more than just you. If we don't stop him, he'll destroy everyone in his path." Emerald was skeptical but willing to listen. "Why help us now?" Margaret's expression softened. "Because I've seen what he's capable of, and for all our differences, I don't want to see you or anyone else hurt." Reluctantly, David agreed to work with her, though he kept her involvement closely guarded. With Margaret's intel, David and his team began to piece together Vincent's network of corruption. Emerald, determined to help, immersed herself in the investigation, uncovering key details Vincent had overlooked. Their efforts culminated in a decisive move. At a board meeting for one of David's subsidiaries, Vincent attempted to stage a hostile takeover. But armed with evidence of his illegal activities, David exposed him in front of the entire board. The humiliation was palpable as security escorted Vincent out of the building. While the victory was significant, David knew the battle wasn't over. Vincent was too cunning to give up so easily. That night, as they celebrated their success, David pulled Emerald aside. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Emerald smiled. "We're a team, remember?" David leaned in, his lips brushing against hers. The kiss was tender and full of unspoken promises. In that moment, they knew their connection was unbreakable, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Even with the victory over Vincent, a lingering tension filled the air. David doubled security measures at home and work, ensuring Emerald's safety at all times. Though she appreciated his efforts, Emerald couldn't shake the feeling that Vincent wasn't done with them. One evening, while reviewing reports in David's study, Emerald came across an old photograph of David with his late father. The resemblance was striking, and the stern expression on his father's face hinted at the immense pressure David must have endured growing up. David walked in and noticed her holding the photo. "He was a hard man to please," he admitted, sitting beside her. "But he taught me everything I know." Emerald placed a comforting hand on his. "You've done more than just build an empire, David. You've created something worth fighting for. That's why Vincent can't win." David pulled her into a warm embrace, grateful for her unwavering support. "With you by my side, I know I can face anything." As David delved deeper into his battle with Vincent, Emerald found herself reflecting on her own journey. One night, as they shared a quiet dinner, she decided to open up about her past. "I wasn't always this strong," Emerald began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Growing up, I learned quickly that the world isn't kind to those who have nothing." David listened intently as she recounted her struggles. Nights spent sleeping on park benches, relying on shelters, and the constant fear of what tomorrow might bring. "But then I met you," she said, her eyes meeting his. "You didn't just offer me a chance. You gave me hope. That's something I'll never forget." David reached across the table and took her hand. "You've given me just as much, Emerald. Your strength inspires me every day." Their bond deepened that night, solidifying the foundation of trust and love they had built together. Vincent's desperation reached new heights as his resources dwindled. In a final attempt to regain control, he orchestrated a scheme to publicly humiliate David at a high-profile charity gala. Unbeknownst to David, Vincent had planted falsified documents that implicated him in illegal business practices. The plan was to release the documents during David's keynote speech, causing a scandal that would tarnish his reputation irreparably. Emerald, however, caught wind of the plot through a chance encounter with one of Vincent's disgruntled associates. Without hesitation, she relayed the information to David and his team, who worked tirelessly to counter the threat. The night of the gala, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. David took the stage, with confidence, unaware of the chaos brewing behind the scenes. Just as Vincent's accomplices were about to unleash the forged documents, David's security team intervened, confiscating the evidence and detaining the perpetrators. David addressed the crowd with poise, exposing Vincent's schemes and reaffirming his commitment to integrity. The audience erupted in applause, and Vincent's plan crumbled before his eyes. With Vincent's downfall, peace finally returned to David and Emerald's lives. Though the journey had been fraught with challenges, their love had grown stronger with each obstacle. One sunny afternoon, David surprised Emerald with a trip to a secluded villa overlooking the ocean. As they walked along the shore, he took her hand and knelt on one knee. "Emerald," he began, his voice filled with emotion, "you've shown me the true meaning of love and resilience. I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Emerald's face as she nodded. "Yes, David. 1,000 times, yes." The waves crashed around them as David slipped the ring onto her finger, sealing their commitment to a future filled with love and hope. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe for more delightful stories.